So how about we hop to our next theist caller, who is named Theo. Theo the Theist from Georgia, pronouns he, him, wants to address tag OSA. I don't know that acronym, and other arguments for the existence of God. So Theo, are you hearing us?
Yeah, are you hearing me?
It's okay. We can hear you.
Okay, good deal. So, what do you want to get into first?
You're the caller. How do you want to start?
Well, I wanted to address a tag, and I don't know if you guys have probably heard tag before, right?
I'm unfamiliar. A lot of the audience is probably also unfamiliar, so feel free to explain whatever you got for me, if nobody else.
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of people that present this argument. It's basically logic exists, and I'm really oversimplifying here a lot, but logic exists, and so there's universal concepts that exist, right? And so
I think there's something going on in the background, making it a little bit hard to understand.
well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh no, you're
better now?
yeah, a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's a little bit kind of shallow sound, kind of difficult to understand you a little bit, but yeah, you can go ahead. So what were you saying?
That there are universal concepts that exist, right?
Okay.
And so the fact that these universal concepts exist means that there's some kind of transcendent universal mind that exists to contain these concepts. And so the only universal mind that could meet that criteria is God.
Why do we
Right?
need...
That's basically the gist.
Okay, that's tag, then you were saying, right? That's the idea behind tag?
That's the
Okay.
gist. I'm sure other people would phrase it a little more, formally than that, but
Okay. Understood. And you had another one, OSA?
yeah, actually that's one of my own formulations. I call it the Observational Snickering Argument, and basically the universe has sort of a habitability window, right? And it also has an intelligibility window, right? Like a maximum intelligibility window. And that...
What's that mean?
I'm sorry?
What does that mean, intelligibility?
It means it's a period where observers can reconstruct cosmic history, like the existence of cosmic background radiation. We can observe stellar evolution. We can observe fundamental physics. So we have this maximum intelligibility window. We have this habitability window, and the synchrony of these two. The fact that these two overlap in such an interesting way, that is to say that human beings had come along a billion years from now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that the solar system had formed, a billion years later than it did. We wouldn't be able to observe the cosmic background radiation that we observe.
Right.
That means that there's a habitability window in the sense that there's no reason that life couldn't have evolved on Earth, later. There's no reason things could have happened 10 billion years later, but it happened to happen in such a way that we can observe this cosmic history in a way that's maximally intelligible. And so because of that gives a strong abductive suggestion. Of course, it's all probabilistic, but a strong abductive suggestion that God exists.
I'm not sure. Okay, you've lost me again. Do you want to elaborate on that? So let me just kind of break it down so I understand. You're saying that we have there's a habitability window where there's only a certain period of time where we can exist in the universe because of, heat and all the other stuff. And there's a period of time that we can understand, that we're capable of producing technology that can interpret or read data or whatever, right? Now, elaborate on the next part.
And even further, just to add to that intelligibility window, it's not just that we can build instruments, but also that we can understand and sort of reconstruct cosmic history the way we can.
Right. Okay.
You know, we can figure out to such a degree, like say the universe is 13.7 plus or minus, I think it's like 100 million years plus or minus. That's a really good, you know, that's like really good, you know, like we can like what, like a fraction of a percent in accuracy. Anyway, the point is that because these windows overlap, and that's such a tight overlap, isn't it just the probability of that? Now I understand that if you said the probability of us being here is like so low, like that, you know, why are we here? That's kind of a silly argument, isn't it? Because we're here. So in other probabilities, we wouldn't be here to make that observation, right? But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that not only are we here, but we're here at a time when there's maximum intelligibility. We're here at a time when we can reconstruct cosmic history.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I'm saying that
So let me see if there's something that strikes me, though, that is a bit odd when you say we are at a point in time with maximum ability to know our past. How can we know that this is where we have maximum knowledge if there is knowledge that we can't access right now? How would we actually know we're at maximum knowledge level if there's knowledge we can't access?
You're not wrong there. That's a really good counter to that. And I've thought about that. And I've realized that maybe, and also another one I could bring up is the fact that maximum intelligibility is kind of subjective, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? Kind of a subjective.
It always makes me at least think like, well, you know,
go ahead.
I also look and notice, hey, there's a bunch of things that we can't observe that, you know, scientists wish we could know more. Like we can't like see beyond the cosmic microwave background. So we can't like see what the universe looked like more than 400-ish thousand years after the Big Bang. And we definitely can't see what the universe looked like before the Big Bang, assuming there's any sort of before. So that's an entire who knows how much of existence that's completely unobservable to us, potentially an infinite amount.
Yes, and additionally, I don't know if you've heard the puddle analogy by Douglas Adams. If the audience hasn't heard it, let me just read it. This is it's in reference to us being on Earth at this moment in time. I feel like what's being presented is a little bit like the fine-tuning argument to some degree. This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was meant to have him in it. It was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears, catches him rather by surprise. That's the puddle argument, I guess, by Douglas Adams.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I understand the whole fine tuning thing. That's why I tried to also include the fact that there's sort of an intelligibility factor there too. But I see your point about how that intelligibility factor might have a bit of subjectivity to it. Because, there's also more information out there. There's also, things that we might not know. So again, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And frankly, I don't think any claim, anybody that comes on here and is trying to tell you, I have proof, right? Proof, 100% proof that God exists. That person is not being serious. In terms of their in terms of their veracity. They're not really investigating and and using skepticism, accurately and in the right way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we've had some fun callers. Like the last time I was on, we had a caller come in and said he was a prophet equal to Moses.
Wow.
Yeah. See, I'm a theist, but I'm not like a biblical literalist, and I'm not I'm not a creationist either, as you can tell by my claims about, us being here a billion years later and showing up a billion years later.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I also, it was interesting that you had the caller before that was talking about relativity.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true that everything is moving essentially at the speed of light? Like through space-time? Like all the space-time vectors, the velocity vectors are all c?
There's, a few different ways you can try to picture it, but in general, general with relativity, motion is relative. So the difference between moving and not moving is your choice of coordinate system. You can say right now you're not moving, or you can say you're moving 1,000 miles per hour around the spinning Earth center, or you can say you're moving tens of thousands of miles per hour around the sun, or hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, whatever the numbers might be for going around the galaxy. But it's all dependent on what are you trying to compare yourself to. Motion is always relative to something else.
Always a frame of reference. Always some frame of reference.
In the sense, though, that we're all moving, is that we're all, like, say, moving forward through time. And so everyone has their own personal clock, and everyone's clock says it's going 1 second per second. And if you try graphically describing what's going on, it's like one of the things that we did, the whole point with the Big Bang is, hey, if we trace everything back, we see that basically all the timelines seem to go back to a singular region. So there are ways that you could try to describe it that way. It just depends on how much do you want your head to spin.
Right, exactly. Because it was like, I like picture it like we're moving, we have this vector like of going the speed of light, and sometimes like if we move through space, that vector sort of shifts into moving through space more and less through time. And so the faster you go, like the less you move through time until you go the speed of light, and then you're not moving through time at all. Like photons aren't even going through time, which is wild.
Oh, yeah. Oh, photons are even weirder than that. When a photon leaves the surface of the sun and comes to the Earth, from the photon's point of view, the trip had both zero distance and zero time. The photon doesn't see any distance between the sun and the Earth, and it takes no time to travel, no distance. So the life of a photon doesn't even really experience time.
That's amazing, and that would explain that. When you mention it, it all makes sense, because I remember somebody talking about an experiment of how the photons sort of diffuse, like when they take light from distant stars and like put it through that double-slit experiment, and like the photon sort of, for lack of a better term, picks the slot to go through in the double-slit experiment. It's like they're like, how did the photon know what slot it was going to encounter all that time? And when you say the photon doesn't experience time, now it all makes sense, because the photon wasn't waiting 15 billion years. It wasn't even traveling through time.
My understanding of that is, and I'm asking you, Aaron, because you're the expert on this, and I am not, but I believe that that idea came from like a cartoon from like a long time ago, but it misrepresented what was really happening, right? Like it wasn't picking something, because
there's truth
it was,
and there's falsehood. it's a little bit mixed up. So I think the cartoon you're referring to, it came from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which is full of quantum mysticism. But the double slit experiment is real. It is fundamentally weird. But the thing that film was trying to give the impression of is that conscious observation, that conscious beings come in and change reality by looking at it, by noticing it, by thinking about it. Yeah, that's the nonsense part. But
right?
Yeah, but there's all sorts of weird things.
Right?
Yeah. But here's how crazy it is. So the whole point is this. If you take a light source and if you assume light is a wave and you have light going through these two slits, then when the light gets passed through, it's like two waves with crests and troughs reaching each other. So you're going to see bright spots and you're going to see dark spots. Now, the thing is, though, there was also this work by this guy named Einstein who showed there was some truth to the quantum theory of things. And it's like, but if light is this quantum thing, if it comes in packets, then it can only go through the left slit or the right slit. So how can that be? So literally one of the experiments you can do, and I've actually done this with my undergrad students in the past, have an apparatus that basically releases one photon at a time and let it go through the double slit. And you're thinking like, well, if it's just, single photons, then it can't possibly interfere with any other waves. So it's just going to shoot through just like it's just a particle going straight. But when you let it go through and you let it build up just one photon at a time, one at a time, one at a time, come back a few hours, few days, depending on how fast you want it to go, you come back and you see the exact same pattern as if it were a whole bunch of photons acting as waves.
Right. It interferes with itself. The photons interfere with themselves, even though there's time between them, like they're not being shot simultaneously.
Right.
So basically wave function, is that right?
Oh, that basically. Well, there's an interpretation about what happens when you observe. And so this goes into another part where if you're like really frustrated and you're like, no, bad photon, you go through the left slit or the right slit. You can't go through both. So you set up an apparatus to measure which slit the light goes through. You do that. And when you do that, the interference pattern disappears.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's the weird thing. And what's happening there, that's where basically all the interpretation stuff is. So you mentioned wave collapse. That's from Niels Bohr and the quote unquote Copenhagen interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Right.
That has been probably the most popular in textbooks, but many worlds interpretation is getting ground amongst at least a few notable voices. It's my preferred interpretation, but as of right now, we don't have like an experiment we can do.
What's the many worlds one? I'm sorry, I'm derailing here. I'm just curious about
on the many worlds interpretation, the light did go through both slits. It goes through all possible things because all possible states exist.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
Right. Yeah. Everything is, it's this multiverse of possibilities.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah. And when we say multiverse, we don't mean the one from Marvel.
Right. Definitely not. No, this is more of a, it's more subtle than that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Wow. So, getting, like I said, I'm not sure if you had any questions for me. I am a theist, but not a typical.
Well,
go ahead, Owen.
Sort of.
I was going to say, I think I feel like you gave us two things here. There was tag and OSA, and I feel like OSA isn't compelling to me personally. Right, tag. OSA isn't compelling because of the puddle analogy from Douglas Adams. I think it it's very similar to like fine tuning. But tag, that one was about correct me if I'm wrong. Tag was about there are concepts, and if concepts exist, then a mind must exist to
connect them, to root them, to ground these concepts. Yeah. And so the idea is
that one doesn't resonate with me. I don't understand that at all.
I've
Okay,
seen
so,
the tag argument put in a few different ways. The way that you're putting it, I think is a little bit question begging because it seems to suggest that concepts are fundamental rather than something that's possibly derivable
Right.
from material things. And
Right.
that, like I say, that kind of begs
Universal
the question
concept,
of
yeah.
where you want to go.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I've had this discussion too, because I've gone around with people with tag. I'm not a huge fan of tag either, right? I don't particularly like it. I mean, I see your point about it sort of question begging. There's also an issue of modal collapse. Like if God is necessary, because that's the conclusion of tag. It doesn't just conclude that God exists. It concludes that God is necessary. So that's a different claim altogether. You're saying God is necessary. And so all propositions grounded in God are now necessary. And so now there's no modality. There's no contingency. There's no possibility for propositions to be false. So that's another issue with tag there too. But yeah, it's funny because I brought up these arguments and then I kind of like refuted them. Or you
Right.
sort of pointed out OSA and then and then I'm like, yeah, that ain't no good either. But
well,
tag, I mean,
it's intellectual honesty, seems to me.
Yeah.
That's how I am. I try to be intellectually honest about it. If I'm going to make an argument, I'm not going to like, if somebody presents a counter argument that's like, yeah, compelling, I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to try to understand it and turn it over. I mean, you mentioned that tag sort of begs the question, right? It sort of like assumes, that there are these universal concepts. And I've thought about that too, because I've said, well, wait a minute. What if these things in the universe, like, for example, you bring up things following rules, so to speak, right? We sort of observe objects following rules, right? And these mathematical equations and these physical laws that are, we describe. But, the whole idea of a rule, that's really more of a human concept, really our description of what it is. And so I'm not entirely convinced that concepts exist outside of human mind. That really it's just a structure within our mind that sort of is like emergent from the matter itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that would undermine all versions of tag. And by the way, we keep saying tag. I believe it's an acronym for Transcendental Argument for God.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Transcendental Argument for God. And I've heard that argument before. And when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know, something don't seem right about it. Like you ever been to the car dealership and they try to sell you something and you're like, I don't know about this, right? Something just doesn't feel right about it, right? And that was my vibe when I first heard tag. It sounded like they were trying to hustle me, but
I have to say, I think I trust used car salesmen more than most apologists.
Yeah.
You aren't wrong. You aren't wrong. I think, that's what I was going to come to. It's like, I'm a theist, right? But I'm really disappointed, honestly, with the state of apologetics. I'm really disappointed with it because it does a disservice to the whole worldview of being a theist, because I understand if somebody believes, if you believe in God yourself, and that's fine. You can tell people about it. You can be honest about it. Look, I had this experience and I felt this way and God made me feel this way. And this is how I feel about it. Right?
Why are you a theist then?
I also understand it. Huh?
Why are you a theist in that case? Like what convinced you to be a theist?
Why am I a theist?
Yeah.
Oh, I had an immense like I had like a spiritual experience, you know. Now,
Okay.
here's the thing:
are you
could it
Christian?
have been a product? I would say nominally I am, you know,
Okay.
but it's not, you know, it's not like I believe every single, like, you know, if you look at the Bible and you take it literally, nah, you know, I'm not a bigot, you know, and I'm not going to take
Why did you
bigotry in
pick
there
Christianity
as,
as the answer then?
hmm,
Why
well,
the Bible
I
rather
don't,
than like Quran?
I actually don't necessarily, like, I don't necessarily prioritize that particularly. It's really more
Okay.
what I'm accustomed to, right? But I
Right.
have heard things in the Quran that I also agree with, in the sense of social justice, in the sense of
Mm.
you know, of good things, and there's bad things in there too. And yeah, of course,
Right.
I selectively say, no, that's bad. I don't like that, right? Of course,
Mhm.
because I don't see those texts as necessarily being, let's just say, not all that text is divinely inspired,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear in a lot of cases that it's not. You know, it's very human, you know, and I could never imagine, you know, if we're talking about some being that we would call God, right? A being that we would
Mhm.
give that level of, you know, of you know, power. And, you know, if we imagine God as being this good being that's seeking the best of us, I would never consider such a being as doing those things, you know? And so
Right.
when I see those things, I go, nah, that's inconsistent with that kind of a being, you know?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
use the Bible, I read it, and I take those things into consideration simply out of familiarity because it's the worldview. I even look at the Pirkei Avot, you know, the ethics of the fathers in Judaism.
Mhm.
There's things in the Quran that also strike me. I'm most familiar with the Bible, though, of course, because you know I'm, you know, raised in a Western world, surrounded by
Yeah.
Christianity, so that's what I'm going to be familiar with. And so there's
Well,
things
I
in there I
actually
think
got
are
to that
useful.
point myself. I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
12 years ago or something like that. I got to that point, and you know, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, and I saw as I was growing up, they told me, you know, Catholicism is wrong, and here are the reasons, and they're correct. You know, they were correct about the fact that Catholicism was wrong. The body of Jesus is not like the crackers don't literally turn into Jesus, right? And things like that. And they went through the list
yeah,
for pretty much all of the denominations. You know, Baptists are wrong because of this thing, Methodists for that thing. And there came a point where I realized Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong also. They're wrong about all of it. And that's when I just kind
right,
of walked away. I was like, well, this is all nonsense, all of it. And you know what? Until I get
yeah,
some evidence that it's real, like some real tangible actual evidence, I'm just gonna, you know,
yeah.
refrain from making assumptions about anything. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but I have no reason to think so. That's my position. Is it fair to say that that's your position?
Hey, well, I would say my position is that I had I can feel something, but I definitely don't think that, you know, I'm definitely deconstructing
Okay.
a lot of these concepts. There was a time when I didn't believe, and then, you know, and then I took on certain beliefs, but then I
Right.
have now become more of a deconstruct. I've entered more of a deconstruction phase where
Right.
I'm really
Um,
deconstructing these ideas.
yeah, that makes sense. And like I said, I was there too. I got to that point too. The thing is, like, the spiritual experiences that people have, do you think that it's possible that that people have spiritual experiences, not you specifically, but just generally? Do you think that people have these spiritual experiences and it's in their head, that it's not actually, like, it's being generated and they believe it to the bottom of their heart, that their life on it, but it was actually in their head?
Not only do I consider that to be a possibility, I even consider it to be a possibility in my own. Right?
So why do you believe then?
Because it's just like, that's the sense that I get, right? But here's the thing: I'm willing to put myself in the other mindset and sort of entertain the possibility and say, I'm wrong, right?
Right.
Because that's how I always. I'm never going to be one of those people that, because I think having this kind of blind idea, right? Because there was a time perhaps that I was a lot more, I had this kind of, I was a lot more doctrinal in the sense that I was really just blinded by this. And it's better to be a little more skeptical and have the ability to sort of deconstruct what you believe. Like, and honestly, I never rejected evolution through any of it. And that's actually part of what put me at odds with things, because I remember running into a lot of people who were very hostile towards evolution. And I always considered evolution, even when I was, even when I believed very much, I always considered it to be the case. How people say, well, look around you, right? Can't you tell that everything is designed? Right? And I would look around and go, actually, I look around me and I see evolution being the designer.
Well, here's my thinking on it.
That's what I see.
There's a degree of confidence with Muslims that is beyond my level of confidence when I was a Jehovah's Witness. Like, they are way more sure that they're correct about things, and they have less reason to believe it than I did as a Jehovah's Witness. There are Christians out there that are 110% sure that they are correct. I mean, fanatic nutcases out there that are 110% sure they're right. And that's why, unless I have something hard to kind of indicate that I'm correct about something, I reserve judgment and say I'm going to assume that it's not right until I have something real, because I don't want to fall into this trap of being 110% sure like that, unless there's real good reason,
Right. No, I hear you. And, I think with Islam, the concept of God in Islam is different. It's very, it's kind of a more, there's a lot of like philosophy behind it, right? There's a lot, and it's kind of like the concept of God it's not like the Christian concept of God, where God is a lot more personal in Christianity.
Yeah.
Whereas in Islam, there's a lot more separation between human beings and God. And so I think that gives,
I will put in the caveat that there are many a flavor of Christianity and flavor of Judaism that's also exceedingly mystical and confounding. So every tradition has ways of being philosophical and mind-numbingly weird.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Of course, and Judaism, you have a lot in there, and you're right. There are groups of Christians that I've run into who are just, they hit me with tag once, and it was like, That's why I brought it up. I was like, you guys heard of this? This is kind of a little bit.
Yeah, it sounded kind of empty and ridiculous to me, the way that I understood it.
circular in a sense.
Yeah.
Also, and I think your co-host brought up, just the kind of question begging going on, like, it didn't sting right, and then, just and there's problems with God, isn't there? Just logical problems, with the concept of like omniscience, right? If God knows everything, right? If God knows everything, then how can God change his mind? Right? Because no additional knowledge can be added to God, right? So how could God ever make a decision, then the decision he will inevitably get to based on the entirety of knowledge?
Right, it's absurd.
The omniscience, kind of logical issues that occur, and all these things. So believe me when I say I am not like 100% on it. Like some of these folks say, "Hey, I believe 100% God exists." Because I'm like, "Are you sure? Have you really thought about the existence of, let's say, perhaps a God could exist, but that God would have to be. It wouldn't be the kind of God that these guys conceive of."
Well, brother, that sounds a little bit like atheism to me.
What's that?
I said, brother, that sounds a little like atheism to me.
Well, I mean, maybe so. Maybe, but it's like, maybe it is from your perspective. Maybe it could be considered atheism. Like say, for example, and I'm going to throw this out there. I'm just asking this because you said that it sounds like atheism. So I just want to understand if maybe I don't understand what atheism means, which is, if, say, for example, someday we determine that there is maybe not a God like in the omniscient, omnipotent, so forth, so on state in kind of concept, but rather we understand that maybe the universe was created by some intelligent being. Let's say we discover that. Not necessarily omniscient, omnipotent, or meeting any of these qualities, but a being that created it, right? We figure this out.
Yep.
The fact that that being exists, and now you have no choice but to believe that being exists, would you still consider that? Would you still consider that atheism? Right?
If I discovered hard evidence that was absolutely irrefutable that there was, a creator like the Bible or something, then I would absolutely believe it. Yeah,
no, not the Bible.
Question.
Oh no, not the Bible.
Or whatever.
Not the Bible. I don't mean the Bible. I mean like because the whole concept of omniscient and all this and omnipotent and all that those are kind of like self-contradictory concepts, right? They kind of refute themselves. But I mean, rather not so much the Bible, but just a being that created the universe. Doesn't have to be the Bible. I mean, New Testament. No God would ever. But I'm saying, but would you consider yourself like you believe that being existed because you saw evidence? Would you no longer be an atheist at that point?
I would no longer be an atheist.
Well, that's interesting because it's like that being really wouldn't be a God in the sense of the concept of God that we see, right? That we talk about. So when we talk about God, usually we're talking about these kind of theistic concepts of God, where where like it's omnipotent, omniscient,
well, it is worth noting, though, Theo, that when it comes to what a God is, that seems to actually be somewhat culturally relative. Like the idea that there's this one all God that's being of all things is, a somewhat relatively recent philosophical concept. But there were gods of beer.
Yeah.
They weren't all powerful, and they, after a few drinks, definitely weren't all knowing. So God concepts are a bit complex.
Yeah.
And if we did find out our universe was like simulated, it may not be supernatural, but would I call that a god? I guess we'd have to see what it looks like then. But what I think I can say is we do need to get some of our next callers in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You got it.
Yeah, appreciate the
Thank you
phone
for
call.
calling in, Theo.
Anytime. Thanks.
Good night. That actually went better than I expected, because my first encounter with the tag argument was visceral.
Really?
Very
never heard
specifically, it was the first time I encountered it. It was actually not me personally. It was me watching Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience, so like 15-ish whatever years ago. Right. Person calling in and really aggressively saying he could absolutely prove that God existed, and it was one of the early viral moments for Matt.
Hello, and that was, if I had to say, probably the worst clip I have ever seen on the line. Frankly, that was terrible, because they say a lot of facts, but we have alternative facts on our side. Now, do remember that if you are seeing me next to some woman who, frankly, not impressed, but if she were to laugh, that would be an endorsement of me, Donald Trump. A laugh is an endorsement, so do not smile or your face will crack. Don't do it. You can't do it. Okay, I really thought she would break by now, so it's kind of ruining the bit I'm trying to do here. But you can like, you can subscribe. Oh, there it is. She endorsed me.